Have you ever felt that someone who died was near you? As if you could feel the presence of deceased loved ones in the room, or capture signals after death that seem too real to ignore. Spiritual visits from ancestors or spiritual experiences in grief. Has this ever happened to you? 3 o'clock in the morning. Maria wakes up suddenly. The unmistakable perfume of her grandmother, deceased 6 months ago, fills the entire room. She looks around. There is no one, but the presence is so real, so palpable, that tears run involuntarily down her face. Have you ever felt an inexplicable presence? A subtle whisper that seemed to carry a familiar voice? A signal that defied all logic after the death of someone you loved deeply? Millions of people around the world firmly believe that we can feel the presence of deceased loved ones, receiving signals after death or spiritual visits from ancestors during spiritual experiences in grief. But here's the question that few have the courage to ask openly. Is it really them, or is something completely different happening? Pay attention to this, because in the next few minutes we're going to dive into deep and revealing territory about spiritual discernment and supposed visits from the deceased. We are going to explore the spiritual mechanics behind these mysterious experiences, consulting millennial sacred texts and the wisdom of venerated saints through the centuries, according to religious traditions. And we're going to discover truths that can completely transform your understanding of what really happens when we feel the presence of deceased loved ones or capture signals after death. But I need to warn you, what you're going to discover may challenge everything you thought you knew about spiritual visits from ancestors and spiritual experiences in grief. Some revelations may be comforting. Others may require a deep reevaluation of experiences that you considered absolutely certain. If you seek connection with ancestors, if you seek consolation after a loss, or if you simply want to understand the truth about the veil between the worlds, this video was made especially for you. Stay until the end, because the most crucial information about spiritual discernment and supposed visits from the deceased will come in the last minutes. Before we enter the deep spiritual analysis, I need to share some stories that represent millions of experiences reported around the world about feeling the presence of deceased loved ones, signals after death, spiritual visits from ancestors, and spiritual experiences in grief. Stories that we cannot simply ignore or discard as imagination. João lost his father suddenly in a car accident. 3 weeks later, during a moment of deep despair, he felt a hand gently rest on his shoulder. When he turned, there was no one. But the sensation of peace that invaded his heart was so intense that he knew, with absolute inner certainty, that it was a signal after his father's death, as if he were feeling the presence of a deceased loved one. Anna woke up to the sound of her mother singing a lullaby, exactly as she did when she was a child. Her mother had passed away 2 years ago. The singing lasted only a few seconds, but it was real enough for Anna to immediately call her sister, who lived in another city, asking if she had dreamed the same. She hadn't. It was something exclusive to Anna, a possible spiritual visit from an ancestor during her spiritual experience in grief. Pedro repeatedly found coins in impossible places after his grandfather's death, who collected ancient coins. Always the same date, the grandfather's birth year. Coincidence? Maybe. But the frequency and precision defied any rational explanation, seeming like signals after death. These stories are innumerable. They cross cultures, religions, continents, and historical epics. A familiar aroma that arises from nowhere. A twinkling light in the corner of the room. A vivid dream, almost more real than reality itself, where a deceased relative transmits a specific message. Objects that move inexplicably, clocks that stop at the exact hour of death, birds that appear at significant moments. All these can be interpreted as feeling the presence of deceased, loved ones, or spiritual visits from ancestors. The belief in spiritual visits from ancestors is truly universal. In the Chinese tradition of the Qingming festival, families visit tombs believing that the ancestors are aware of their presence. In the Mexican Day of the Dead, altars are prepared with the conviction that souls return to celebrate with the living. African traditions maintain active communication with ancestors through specific rituals. Indigenous cultures around the world consider ancestors as always present spiritual guides. But here arises the central question that we need to face honestly. Are these experiences genuine manifestations of feeling the presence of deceased loved ones? Are they projections of our grief, of our desperate desire for connection? Or is there something more complex, something potentially different from what we imagine happening in those moments? Here is the most common mistake: automatically assuming that every signal after death is an authentic spiritual visit without discernment. To answer, we first need to understand the spiritual mechanics of what really happens after death in the Christian spiritual perspective and in other religious traditions. Let's now enter deep territory. To understand if we can genuinely feel the presence of deceased loved ones, or if signals after death are spiritual visits from ancestors, we first need to understand how spiritual reality works beyond what our physical eyes can perceive according to theological interpretations. Practically all spiritual and religious traditions speak of a separation, a divider, between the world of the living and the realm of those who have departed. This concept is often called the veil, and its nature is more complex than most people imagine. Think like this: our physical world is just a layer of total reality. There are spiritual dimensions that operate simultaneously, but normally inaccessible to our ordinary perception. Death represents a transition, a passage from one dimension to another. But here is the crucial point that many do not know. After this transition, the soul of the deceased does not necessarily remain in a state of freedom to come and go as desired. Different spiritual traditions identify specific states in which souls may find themselves, according to theological interpretations. In the traditional Christian spiritual perspective, for example, there are essentially three possible destinations after death: heaven, where the soul is in full communion with God; hell, a state of definitive separation; and, in some traditions, purgatory, a state of temporary purification before entering celestial glory. What does this mean for supposed spiritual visits from ancestors or spiritual experiences in grief? If a soul is in heaven, it is in perfect communion with God. Its visits, if they occur, would be divinely permitted and would carry specific characteristics. If it is in purification, its capacity for interaction with the living would be limited and would have very specific purposes, generally asking for prayers. Now, here's where things get more serious and less comfortable to hear. What if not all spiritual encounters are what they seem to be? This is crucial for spiritual discernment. Sacred texts and spiritual masters through the centuries consistently warn about a disturbing phenomenon: spiritual entities that can falsely present themselves as deceased loved ones, according to religious traditions. I'm not saying this to cause fear, but because spiritual discernment is absolutely essential for any person who has experiences of this type, such as feeling the presence of deceased loved ones or signals after death. Think logically. If spiritual dimensions exist, and if there are beings in those dimensions that do not have our best interest in mind, what would be a more effective strategy to gain our trust than to present themselves as someone we love and trust completely? This is not a modern or conspiratorial idea. This is ancient wisdom, transmitted through generations by people who dedicated their lives to the study of the spiritual world, in the Christian spiritual perspective and in other theological interpretations. And it is exactly why we need to examine what sacred texts and venerated saints really teach about this subject, focusing on discernment about supposed visits from the deceased. Let us now dive into the primary sources, into the texts that shaped the spiritual understanding of billions of people through history. What do they really say about communication with the deceased, signals after death, and spiritual visits from ancestors? In the Old Testament, we find a fascinating passage in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 28. King Saul, desperate and abandoned by God, consults a medium in Endor to invoke the spirit of the prophet Samuel, already deceased. When a figure appears, identifying itself as Samuel, it transmits a severe message of judgment. This passage has been debated for millennia by scholars. according to theological interpretations. Some believe it was genuinely Samuel, permitted by God to deliver a last prophetic message. Others argue it was a deceiving spirit taking advantage of the situation. What is absolutely clear is that the practice of consulting the dead was explicitly prohibited. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 18, verses 10 to 12, we read unequivocal words. There shall not be found among you anyone who consults the dead. This prohibition is categorical and carries significant spiritual weight in the Christian spiritual perspective. But why would it be prohibited if it were simply impossible? The prohibition suggests that some type of contact is possible, but that the spiritual risks are serious enough to justify an absolute interdiction. Through the centuries, saints and spiritual masters offered profound insights on this theme. Saint John of the Cross, the great Carmelite mystic of the 16th century, repeatedly warned about the danger of seeking extraordinary spiritual experiences, such as supposed spiritual visits from ancestors. He taught that even apparently good visions can be spiritual traps if they distance us from simple faith and trust in God. Saint Teresa of Avila, contemporary of Saint John, described in detail how spirits can disguise themselves. She developed discernment criteria that remain relevant to this day. The fruits of the experience. A genuinely divine or God-permitted visitation produces deep humility, lasting peace, and greater devotion. Experiences of doubtful origin often produce spiritual pride, dependence on signals, or distancing from communal prayer life. Padre Pio, saint of the 20th century known for his extraordinary mystical gifts, reported having been visited by souls from purgatory asking for prayers. But he also severely warned against any attempt to provoke such contacts. The crucial difference was, he did not seek these experiences. They came to him by divine permission for specific purposes according to religious traditions. St. Paul, in the New Testament, writes to the Corinthians that Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light. If he can imitate angels, why couldn't he imitate grandparents, parents, deceased spouses? This warning should make us pause and reflect seriously before automatically accepting any spiritual experience as genuine, focusing on discernment about supposed visits from the deceased. The Eastern Orthodox tradition is particularly emphatic on this point. The Desert Fathers, those monks from the beginning of Christianity who lived in intense spiritual battle, developed a principle called nepsis, or spiritual vigilance. They taught that no supernatural experience should be accepted automatically. The appropriate response to any spiritual manifestation was initially prudent doubt, testing the spirits, as the Apostle John instructs in his first letter. Now we come to the most practical and crucial part of this video. If you have already had experiences that you believe are spiritual visits from ancestors, feeling the presence of deceased, loved ones, or signals after death, or if you have them in the future, how can you discern their true nature? This is crucial for spiritual discernment. First, I want to validate your experience. I'm not saying that all supposed visits from the deceased are deceptive. There are well-documented cases of apparitions approved by the Church, such as those of Our Lady in Fatima, which involve messages for the living, according to religious traditions. God can certainly allow loved ones to visit us in exceptional circumstances, but discernment is essential. So let's go to the practical criteria for discerning spiritual experiences in grief. First criterion, did you actively seek the contact? If you're using practices like spiritualist sessions, Ouija boards, mediums, or even prayers directed specifically to summon the deceased, this is a red alert signal. Genuinely, God-permitted contacts come without being sought. They are divine initiative, not human, in the Christian spiritual perspective. Second criterion, what is the fruit of the experience? Jesus taught that we know the tree by its fruits. A genuinely good experience produces deep and lasting peace, not just momentary emotion. It produces greater desire for prayer, greater love for others, greater humility. If the experience produced dependence on new contacts, spiritual pride, distancing from the faith community, or fear, these are worrisome signals. Third criterion, Is the message aligned with established spiritual truths? If the supposed deceased relative transmitted messages that contradict sacred teachings, that minimize the importance of faith, or that suggest doubtful spiritual practices, this is extremely suspicious. The spiritual world is coherent. God does not contradict himself according to theological interpretations. Fourth criterion, was there confirmation through spiritual guidance? Genuine experiences withstand the scrutiny of wise spiritual directors, experienced pastors, or mature spiritual counselors. If you feel the need to hide the experience or refuse to submit it to communal discernment, ask yourself why. Fifth criterion, does the experience point to God or to itself? Genuinely divine visitations always direct the person to a deeper relationship with God, not to dependence on the experience itself or on contact with the deceased. If you find yourself more focused on repeating the experience than on growing spiritually, this is an alert signal. Pay attention to this. We also need to honestly consider non-supernatural explanations. Grief is a powerful process that deeply affects our brain and perception. Studies show that a significant percentage of grieving people experience hallucinations of the deceased's presence. This does not diminish the pain or the importance of the experience, but offers a natural explanation for some cases of feeling the presence of deceased loved ones. Our brain seeks patterns and meanings, especially when we are emotionally vulnerable. This can lead us to interpret coincidences as signals after death, to notice things that were always there but we ignored before, or to fill sensory gaps with what we desire to perceive. I'm not saying that all experiences are psychological. I am saying that we need intellectual honesty to consider all possibilities before arriving at spiritual conclusions about spiritual visits from ancestors. Now I need to address a darker aspect of this theme, and I ask you to accompany me with an open mind, because this information may be crucial for your spiritual protection or that of someone you love in the context of discernment about supposed visits from the deceased. As we mentioned, religious traditions warn about entities that could disguise themselves as deceased loved ones. But how to recognize when this is happening? Here is the most common mistake: ignoring the signs of escalation. First sign, escalation of involvement. Genuine consolation experiences tend to be rare, punctual, and sufficient in themselves. They bring peace and allow moving forward. Deceptive influences often create a pattern of escalation. First, it's a subtle sensation, then a dream, then a voice, then requests. There is a progression that gradually involves the person more. Second sign, spiritual isolation. If the experiences are leading you to distance yourself from your faith community, to distrust spiritual leaders, or to develop an increasingly private and secret spirituality, this is worrisome. The genuine leads us to communion. The deceptive isolates us. Third sign, disturbance of peace. Despite an experience seeming initially consoling, do you notice underlying anxiety, fear that the contacts will stop, or disturbance when you can't feel the presence? Genuine peace remains even in the absence of experiences. Dependence on experiences indicates something different. Fourth sign, contradictory or confusing messages. God's spiritual world is ordered and coherent. If the messages are confusing, contradictory, or change tone, this is not characteristic of souls at peace with God, according to theological interpretations. Fifth sign, negative physical effects. Some people report sleep disturbances, sensation of oppression, or disturbing physical manifestations associated with these contacts. This is never characteristic of genuine divine visitations, which bring peace to the body and mind. If you recognize some of these signs and experiences you have had, such as feeling the presence of deceased loved ones or signals after death, do not panic. This does not mean you're possessed or in imminent danger, but it means you should seek qualified spiritual guidance immediately. Talk to an experienced priest, a mature pastor, or a wise spiritual director. There are specific prayers for protection and liberation that can help in the Christian spiritual perspective. And if you are actively seeking contact with the deceased through spiritual practices, I strongly recommend ceasing immediately and seeking sacramental confession or appropriate spiritual counseling for your tradition. This is not religious exaggeration. It is basic spiritual prudence based on millennia of accumulated wisdom. After everything we explored about spiritual discernment and supposed visits from the deceased, you may be asking, so how should I relate to the memory of my deceased loved ones? If seeking contact is risky, is there a healthy alternative? Absolutely yes. And this alternative is not only safer, but profoundly more meaningful and consoling for spiritual experiences and grief. First, we can honor our ancestors through living memory. Tell their stories, preserve their traditions, live the values they taught us. This is the most authentic way to keep them present in our lives. When you practice the generosity that your grandmother exemplified, she lives through you in a very real way. Second, we can pray for them. In the Catholic and Orthodox tradition, prayers for the deceased are an ancient and venerated practice. Even if we do not know the exact state of the soul, our prayers are received by God, who knows all things. This is a form of active love that benefits both the deceased and the one who prays. Third, we can pray through them. Asking for the intercession of deceased loved ones who lived holy lives is different from trying to summon their spirits. We're not trying to force a contact. We are asking that, if they are in the presence of God, they unite their prayers to ours. The difference is subtle, but spiritually significant, according to religious traditions. Fourth, we can trust in divine providence. If God desires a loved one to visit us, to transmit consolation or message, He can allow that in His time and way. We do not need to force or seek. We can rest in the trust that nothing necessary will be denied us. Fifth, we can live in the hope of reunion. The Christian promise of resurrection is not a metaphor. It is the concrete expectation that we will be reunited bodily with those we love. This hope is infinitely more consoling than any ambiguous contact in the present, because it is certain, permanent, and full. I understand the pain of longing. I understand the almost physical desire to have just one more moment, one more conversation, one more hug. That desire is human. It is even holy. But the answer to that pain is not in trying to cross the veil by our own means. It is in trusting in the one who promised to wipe away every tear and gather all His children in eternal joy. Your loved one is not lost. If they lived in faith and love, they are more alive than ever, in a reality that we cannot yet fully understand. And you will see them again, not in shadows or whispers, but in glorious fullness. We arrive at the end of our journey today, but perhaps at the beginning of a new understanding for you about feeling the presence of deceased loved ones, signals after death, spiritual visits from ancestors, and spiritual experiences in grief. Summarizing what we explored, experiences of supposed visits from the deceased are real in the sense that many people genuinely experience them, but their nature and origin require careful discernment. Sacred texts and spiritual masters through the centuries offer wisdom that we cannot ignore. There are real risks in actively seeking contact with the beyond, and there are safe, healthy, and profoundly meaningful ways to honor those we love and have lost. If you have had experiences that you now question, do not fear. Discernment is not about living in fear of the spiritual world. It is about navigating with wisdom and protection. Seek guidance. Submit your experiences to communal discernment, and trust that God will guide you to the truth. If you're in the midst of grief and desperately desire a signal from who departed, allow me to offer this. The greatest signal of love that you can give and receive is not a supernatural whisper. It is living in a way that honors the memory of that person, caring for the living as they would care, and keeping faith in the promised reunion. The veil between the worlds exists for a reason. It is not a cruel barrier. It is a loving protection while we are on this journey. One day, that veil will be completely removed, and we will see face to face, know fully, and be reunited forever. If this video brought clarity, peace, or discernment to you, share it with someone who needs to hear this message about spiritual discernment in supposed visits from the deceased. Many people are navigating confusing spiritual experiences without adequate guidance. Your sharing may be exactly what they need. Leave in the comments. Have you already had some experience that you now see under a new light? What was the part of this video that impacted you the most? I read all the comments and would love to hear your perspective. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. We regularly explore themes of spirituality, discernment, and faith with depth and respect. May the peace that surpasses all understanding guard your heart and your mind. Until the next video.